Hello. So in this video, we're going to take a look at a real world business message. This is a bad news message, a negative message, and it's not ideal, but it is recent at time of filming. So this is a really interesting example. It's a really good example in terms of sort of thinking about how business people write, how they deliver messages, etc., etc. And so we're going to take a look at this, and then, and I'm going to go through it and analyze it. We'll talk about what I think doesn't work. There are a few things that I think are fine, but we'll get a sense of it. And this will help sort of understand the dynamics of delivering bad news. So this is from Business Insider. The article is "Read the Memo, Okta's CEO just sent employees announcing layoffs." I'm not going to take us through the whole article, but at the bottom they have the message itself, this memo. So I want to take us through the stages of this memo and talk about what's going on. And again, this sort of analysis is really useful for understanding business communication. So we start with, "Hi, everyone." Oh boy. Right off the bat, this is very, very casual. And as we'll see, this is a bad situation. This is a very negative message. This sort of casual opening, I would not recommend. When you are delivering news that's bad, especially news that's as bad as this turns out to be, I would be much more professional about this. Dear team, dear employees, something like that. I mean, businesses aren't teams. I hate that phrasing, but that's a standard phrasing. But something much more professional than "Hi, everyone." Then we go in. We get the first paragraph here. "After a thoughtful FY25 business planning process, the leadership team and I have made the difficult decision to implement a workforce reduction impacting about 7% of our company, or approximately 400 people. First mistake, you have started with the bad news." This is what we in rhetoric call the direct approach. I've done a video about direct and indirect rhetoric before. You should be seeing a link to it up above. I'll try and remember to put a link to it down in the comments. The direct approach is not good for bad news messages, because as soon as this news is delivered, as soon as readers say, okay, they're firing 400 people, readers are now angry. They're now sad. They're now scared, especially if they don't know whether they're one of the 400 people. They have very strong negative emotional reactions, which means in order to get them to accept an explanation of why this decision was necessary, you now have to work a lot harder. It's much, much easier to persuade people who are not angry, sad, scared, etc., to accept something. They are much more sympathetic when they're not angry, scared, upset, whatever it is. Having those strong negative emotions, those strong negative reactions, that is going to make it much, much harder to persuade them that this decision had to be made and they should accept it and maintain faith in the company. And those are two of the goals of a negative message: to convince the reader to accept the bad news, even if they're not happy about it, and to maintain a positive relationship, a good impression of the company, a good impression of you as an author, whatever it is. Those are things you want to do in a negative message. And if you start with the direct approach, saying 400 people are losing their jobs, that's substantially more difficult because people are less likely to be open to those explanations. We also have this phrase right here, a workforce reduction. This is what we in the business call corporate speak. It is a way of using language to try and obscure what you're actually saying. A workforce reduction, at first glance, sounds much nicer than "we're firing 400 people. That is essentially the message here. But the phrase "a workforce reduction" is theoretically meant to soften the blow of saying we're firing 400 people. The problem is that because this is corporate speak, at least some readers will be like, yeah, that's corporate speak. You're attempting to deceive us. You are purposefully trying to obscure your purpose here. I trust this less. Because corporate speak is similar to double talk or political speak, people often recognize it as a form of mild dishonesty. And so I would generally recommend avoiding corporate speak in bad news messages. Yes, it seems like it might cushion the blow, but for many, it's actually going to be an insult in addition to whatever the bad news is. So then we move on. Second paragraph. If you work in the US, you will receive an email in the next 15 minutes notifying you if your role is impacted or not. If your role is impacted, your leadership will schedule a meeting today to discuss next steps. For employees outside the US who've been identified as impacted or at risk, the notification process may be different based on local laws and practices. Once again, this is a fucked up thing to do here. You'll get an email in the next 15 minutes. That's not a good time frame for this. Realistically, unless you expect your employees to immediately have read this message, then the 15 minutes from now timeline is not useful. They may very well have that email saying you're fired before they get this email saying here's why. So that's a bad strategy. The timeline of this is horrendously thought out. And then your leadership will schedule a meeting today to discuss next steps. No, again, that's much too short a timeline. I would actually recommend, if I was doing this, that personalized emails were sent out to the 400 people who were losing their jobs before this message was sent out. I would, in this message, have said, if you are at risk or impacted, you will have already received an email explaining the next steps in the process. This is not a good way of doing this, because if people immediately read this email, the moment that it comes out, they have 15 minutes of anxiety, and then that assumes that the within the next 15 minutes timeline is accurate. Because my guess is you're not emailing the rest of the company, the other 93% of people, to say, hey, great news, you're not getting fired. Which means that people are likely going to have anxiety for much longer than that 15 minutes in case their email was just delayed. This is an incredibly bad, verging on abusive, I would say, approach to doing this. That might be hyperbolic, but that's my perspective on it. This is bad regardless. Whether or not you agree that potentially abusive is an accurate assessment, this is regardless of that bad. Then we get this. I know this is difficult news, and I'd like to provide some context on how we reached this decision. That context should have come before the bad news. This is the structure of bad news messages, and I've done a video on that as well. You should see a link up above. I'll try and remember to put it in the description. You start with a buffer that gives some neutral or moderately positive greeting, opening. Then you give explanation for why the bad news is, why the decision has been made, why the situation exists, whatever it is. You give that when people are not angry, sad, upset, scared, whatever it is, because they've gotten the bad news. It's much, much easier to get them on your side if you give that explanation beforehand. Then you give the bad news as briefly as possible, and then you quickly move on. You close the message with a goodwill gesture. That is the structure. This is the opposite structure. Giving people the bad news to start, then saying, hey, be anxious about this for at least 15 minutes. Now I'm going to explain. That is not a good way of doing this. People are, after the first two paragraphs, some people likely will just stop reading because they don't care at this point. Like, the way you have treated those individuals is so shitty that they will simply not be interested in the explanation. Those who do keep reading, they will be much harder to convince because you have approached this terribly. So let's take a look at the context. In order to grow profitably, we need to run the business with greater efficiency. While we've taken steps in the right direction, the reality is that costs are still too high. We need to be mindful of our overall spend so we can continue to invest in the areas, products, and routes to market with the most opportunity. To capture our massive potential and build an iconic company, we must be thoughtful about where we place our bets. This action is a proactive measure to help set the company up for long-term success. This is a terrible way to present the context. Dreadful almost from beginning to end. In order to grow profitably, we need to run the business with greater efficiency. That, to a reader who is getting fired, means you are unprofitable. You are the reason we are not efficient. You were holding the company back. Readers are going to read it that way, even if that isn't what the author intends. That's what it says to readers. The reality is that costs are too high. We need to be mindful of our overall spend. Okay, this is standard business stuff. Expenses are high, and there's the old saying, in business, you can either cut expenses or raise profits, or whatever the saying is. It's something along those lines. Sure. Acceptable such as it is, regardless of the fact that 400 people are now without their livelihood. But this idea, our overall spend, this is another corporate speak thing. But then we follow it with this. So we can continue to invest in the areas, products, and routes to market with the most opportunity. So we can continue to invest. That means the company is going to keep spending money. The company has money to spend. They're just not spending it on salaries. They aren't paying people. They have money to spend, but not on you. You aren't worth it. You aren't efficient. To capture our massive potential and build an iconic company, dude, don't do that. Don't say an iconic company. Who the fuck cares? That's not a great technique here. It is overly slangy, and it says, oh, the company is what matters. Then we got this bit. We must be thoughtful about where we place our bets. Again, that is slang. Take that the fuck out of this message. Be more professional. You are firing 400 people. You are irrevocably undermining their ability to live, to pay their rent, to buy food, to clothe themselves and their families, whatever it is. Don't fucking say you aren't a good bet. Because that's what this says. Again, that is what this says to readers. Where we place our bets, you are not a good bet. You are not efficient. You hold the company back. This is terrible phrasing. If you want people to accept this decision and to maintain a positive view of the company, this is not going to get that. This action is a proactive measure to help set the company up for long-term success. Okay, that's fine. I don't find it especially compelling. I don't know that the people being fired are going to find it especially compelling, but that's actually the closest we get to a reasonably phrased explanation of the decision. This next paragraph, I'm going to skip most of it because it sort of details about what the process is going to look like. But I'm going to give you the first two sentences because these are rhetoric as opposed to details about the firing process or the post-firing financial process. To impacted employees, I'm deeply sorry and we thank you for your many contributions. We're committed to supporting you during this transition and providing all possible resources to help you through this time. Okay, that's actually fine. This is the one place in the message where I don't really have any critiques. I think this is actually a good thing to do. This is a goodwill building gesture that you want toward the end of a bad news message. This is meant to help sort of reconstruct some faith in the company, and it's fine. It's decent. Yeah. Then we get this last paragraph. Our priority today is managing this transition as respectfully as possible. As we navigate these changes, remember that Okta is critical infrastructure for 18,800 organizations around the world. We're looking forward to the work ahead with Okta in the right position to extend our leadership position and execute our vision to free everyone to safely use any technology. The first sentence is good. Our priority today is managing this transition as respectfully as possible. Then the entire thing shifts back to here's why it's good for the company. Here's what the company is doing in the future. Here's why the company is amazing. No, you're not selling people who are losing their jobs at this company on here's why the company is great. It is a tone deaf conclusion. It is a conclusion that's like, yeah, the company, it's so fucking awesome, isn't it? Think how great it is that you're not going to be working here anymore. It's a bad strategy. Why, if I'm one of the 400 people who's no longer going to be working at Okta, should I remember that Okta is critical infrastructure for 18,800 organizations around the world? Why would that make me feel any better? It doesn't. It's irrelevant to me if I'm no longer working there. And then the last sentence is just so clumsily written. In the right position to extend our leadership position and to execute our vision to free everyone to safely use technology, it's repetitive and that can easily be fixed. This is not a hard thing to have resolved. Sentence structure here could definitely be redone in order to make that last sentence not suck. And then the cherry on this shitty ice cream sundae, Todd. Just Todd. No sincerely, no best regards, just Todd. Todd is your neighbor who wants to come and borrow your weed whacker. Todd is not how you sign off on a message where you have fired 400 people and put the rest of the company into a panic about whether or not they are going to be fired, at the very least for 15 minutes. Use your fucking full name. Be respectful in this message. The fact that this is just signed Todd is incredibly unprofessional and incredibly disrespectful. And again, this guy is the CEO of Okta. CEO Todd McKinnon. He fucking can't write a bad news message to save his life. Okay, I recognize that I have gotten very angry in this one. I don't know anything else about Todd McKinnon apart from this message, but on the basis of this message, fuck this guy. This is incredibly poorly written. And you are a CEO of a significant company. You should get someone who knows what the fuck they're doing to double check this shit before you fire 400 people with this bullshit bad news message. Do better. And part of the thing is, this is not an isolated incident. I mean, there are famous instances of this from Stephen Elop of Microsoft when he was CEO. I don't think he is anymore. Jack Dorsey when he was CEO of Twitter. The Dorsey message isn't terrible, but the Stephen Elop message is one of the worst written things I've ever encountered. And I've been teaching university for almost 15 years now. So the thing about this, again, analyzing these types of messages is actually really, really useful for writers, but for business people in general. If you can understand the types of mistakes that these people make and why they're mistakes, then in theory, you can do better. And you should. This is the thing. To me, in my humble opinion as a non-business person, but as a human being, if you are going to fire large numbers of people, you should show some goddamn respect when you do it.